Commander Marcus Thornton wanted to shame his ex-wife by inviting her to his prestigious Naval Academy chapel wedding. He thought she would come looking defeated and broken after their bitter divorce. But when Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell arrived in full dress blues with a chest full of combat ribbons, including the Navy Cross and Purple Heart, everyone in the chapel fell silent. The same woman he once called a failed officer was now one of the Navy's most decorated heroes. And that was just the beginning of the most shocking military wedding in Naval Academy history. Once upon a time, at Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia, the largest naval base in the world, there lived a man named Marcus Thornton. At 33, he was everything the Navy wanted in a public relations poster. Tall, distinguished, with perfectly pressed uniforms and a smile that could charm admirals and politicians alike. Commander Thornton came from naval royalty. His great-grandfather had commanded destroyers in World War II. His grandfather had served as a Pentagon strategist during Vietnam, and his father had retired as a captain after 30 years of distinguished service. Marcus wore his heritage like his dress whites, perfectly arranged and impossible to ignore. He drove a spotless Corvette with Navy officer plates, lived in the most prestigious officer housing on base, and never missed an opportunity to remind people that the Thornton name was synonymous with naval excellence. His office walls were covered with photographs of him shaking hands with senators, admirals, and defense contractors. He was the kind of officer who looked perfect in uniform and spoke eloquently at change-of-command ceremonies. But behind the polished brass and the political connections, behind the smooth Pentagon briefings and the carefully orchestrated career moves, there was a crack in Marcus Thornton's perfect facade. His wife, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, was simply a better officer than he was, and everyone on base knew it. Sarah was different from the typical officers' wives who attended the endless rounds of social functions and charity galas. She had graduated from the Naval Academy 3 years behind Marcus, but from the moment she received her commission, it was clear that she possessed something special, an instinctive understanding of leadership, tactics, and the complex art of naval warfare that couldn't be taught in any classroom. While Marcus navigated the corridors of power in Washington, schmoozing with defense contractors and positioning himself for the next prestigious staff assignment, Sarah was at sea, leading sailors through dangerous waters and impossible missions. Her personnel jacket read like a catalog of the Navy's most challenging operations: counter-narcotics missions in the Caribbean, anti-piracy operations off the Horn of Africa, humanitarian relief efforts in the aftermath of natural disasters, and classified special operations that she couldn't discuss even with her husband. The first crack in their marriage appeared during Sarah's second deployment aboard the USS Defiant, a guided missile destroyer patrolling the most dangerous waters in the world. She was serving as the ship's operations officer, responsible for planning and executing complex multi-ship exercises, coordinating with allied navies, and managing the intricate ballet of modern naval warfare. It was during this deployment that Sarah received her first major recognition: a Bronze Star with Combat V for leading a daring rescue operation that saved the crew of a merchant vessel that had been attacked by pirates. The citation read, "Lieutenant Commander Mitchell displayed exceptional courage and tactical brilliance in coordinating a multi-platform rescue operation under hostile fire, directly resulting in the safe recovery of 12 civilian mariners and the capture of 6 armed pirates." Marcus learned about his wife's medal through the Navy Times, not from Sarah herself. The photograph accompanying the article showed his wife on the bridge of the Defiant, her uniform salt-stained from hours on deck, her face serious and focused as she coordinated the rescue operation via radio. She looked like what she was: a warrior, a leader, someone who thrived in the crucible of naval combat. That night, Marcus called Sarah via satellite phone, ostensibly to congratulate her, but really to vent his frustration at being the last to know about his own wife's heroism. "A Bronze Star, Sarah? I had to read about it in the Navy Times. How do you think that made me feel when Admiral Richardson asked me at the O Club if I was proud of my wife's latest medal?" Sarah's voice came through the scratchy satellite connection, tired but patient. Marcus, I'm sorry you found out that way. The operation was classified until last week. I couldn't discuss the details even with you. That's not the point, Marcus replied, pacing around their empty quarters. The point is that everyone on this base knows more about my wife's career than I do. Do you know how that looks? Do you know what people say? What do they say, Marcus? They say I'm riding your coattails. They say I got my current assignment because of who I'm married to. They say I'm Commander Sarah Mitchell's husband, not Marcus Thornton. There was a long pause, broken only by the static of the satellite connection. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was quieter. Marcus, I've never asked for special treatment, and I've never used our marriage to advance my career. If anything, I've been careful to avoid any appearance of impropriety. But that doesn't matter, does it? Marcus's voice grew louder. What matters is perception. What matters is that my wife is out there collecting medals while I'm stuck in briefing rooms and conference calls. Stuck? Sarah's voice sharpened. Marcus, you chose staff assignments. You said you wanted to position yourself for flag rank by building political relationships. I supported that decision, even though it meant we'd be apart more often. I chose those assignments because they were supposed to lead somewhere, Marcus replied. But how can I advance when everyone sees me as the guy married to the war hero? How can I get command of my own ship when the promotion boards know my wife outranks me in everything but pay grade? Sarah was quiet for a moment. Marcus, I'm not your competition. I'm your wife. I thought we were on the same team. We are on the same team, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. It's complicated, Sarah. You wouldn't understand. Try me. Marcus looked out the window of their quarters at the harbor beyond, where ships came and went on missions he was no longer part of. I grew up hearing stories about my great-grandfather's destroyer squadron, about my grandfather's strategic victories, about my father's command tours. The Thornton men don't serve. They lead. They don't follow. They command. But here I am, 33 years old, and the most dangerous thing I've done lately is navigate Pentagon politics. There's honor in staff work, Marcus. Someone has to coordinate between the operational forces and the policymakers. Someone has to ensure that the political decisions support the operational needs. Honor, Marcus repeated bitterly. Try explaining honor to a room full of academy classmates who are commanding ships while I'm writing briefing memos for senators who've never been to sea. The conversation ended without resolution, as so many of their recent conversations had. Marcus hung up the satellite phone and sat alone in their quarters, surrounded by the photographs and mementos of their 5-year marriage. On his desk sat a picture of their wedding day, both of them young and proud in their dress whites, surrounded by an honor guard of their academy classmates, their swords forming an arch under which they had walked as husband and wife. But even then, Marcus remembered, there had been whispers. Sarah had graduated with higher class rank, had been selected for more prestigious assignments, had shown the kind of leadership potential that made senior officers take notice. She had been chosen for immediate assignment to a destroyer, while Marcus had been sent to a shore-based logistics command. Even 5 years ago, people had wondered why someone with Sarah's potential was marrying someone with Marcus's limitations. Those whispers had grown louder with each of Sarah's deployments, each medal, each fitness report that used words like exceptional, outstanding, and promote ahead of peers. Meanwhile, Marcus's own evaluations were solid but uninspiring, competent, reliable, suitable for continued staff assignments. The breaking point came 6 months later, when Sarah returned from her deployment to news that would change both their lives forever. The USS Defiant returned to Norfolk on a gray February morning, her hull scarred by months of operations in hostile waters. Sarah stood on the bridge as the destroyer maneuvered through the channel, watching the familiar skyline of Norfolk emerge from the morning mist. She had been at sea for 18 months, the longest deployment of her career. and she was exhausted in ways that went beyond physical fatigue. The deployment had been classified as highly successful by every metric the Navy used to measure such things. Sarah's tactical innovations had been incorporated into fleet-wide procedures. Her leadership during 3 separate crisis situations had earned the respect of senior commanders throughout the region, and her personal courage during the merchant vessel rescue had made her something of a legend among the enlisted sailors who served under her. But success at sea had come at a cost to her marriage. Marcus's calls had grown less frequent as the deployment progressed, their conversations more strained and formal. When Sarah tried to share the challenges and triumphs of her daily life aboard the Defiant, Marcus seemed distant, uninterested, sometimes even hostile. As the ship tied up to the pier, Sarah could see the crowd of families waiting to welcome their sailors home. She scanned the crowd for Marcus, hoping to see his familiar figure among the wives, children, and parents who had gathered for the homecoming ceremony. But as the minutes passed and the crowd began to thin, it became clear that her husband was not among them. Sarah's executive officer, Commander James Rodriguez, noticed her scanning the crowd. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" "I'm sure Commander Thornton was held up by something at work," Sarah replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "You know how it is with Pentagon assignments?" Commander Rodriguez nodded politely, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. Throughout the deployment, he had watched his operations officer balance the demands of naval leadership with the strain of a deteriorating marriage, and he had developed a deep respect for her professionalism under pressure. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "if you don't mind me saying so, any man would be proud to have you as his wife. What you did during the Al-Mansouri operation, that was the finest display of tactical leadership I've seen in 23 years of naval service." Sarah smiled gratefully. "Thank you, XO. That means a great deal coming from you." But as Sarah drove home alone from the pier, Commander Rodriguez's words only highlighted the contrast between how her fellow officers viewed her service and how her husband seemed to resent it. The base housing unit she shared with Marcus looked exactly as she had left it 18 months earlier. Clean, organized, and somehow impersonal, as if the people who lived there were merely temporary residents rather than a married couple building a life together. Marcus was waiting in the living room when she entered, still wearing his service dress blues from what had apparently been a long day at the Pentagon. He looked older than she remembered, with new lines around his eyes and a tightness to his expression that spoke of stress and unresolved anger. "Welcome home," he said formally, making no move to embrace her or even stand from his chair. Sarah set down her sea bag and looked at her husband carefully. "Marcus, is everything all right? I was hoping you'd be at the pier for the homecoming ceremony." "I had a meeting with Admiral Richardson," Marcus replied. "Couldn't get away." Sarah nodded, though something in his tone suggested there was more to the story. "How have you been? You look tired." Marcus finally stood, but instead of moving toward her, he walked to the window overlooking the harbor. "I've been thinking a lot while you were gone, Sarah, thinking about our marriage, about our careers, about where we're headed." "And what conclusions did you reach?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Marcus turned to face her, his expression set in hard lines. "I reached the conclusion that this isn't working, that what we have isn't a marriage, it's a competition, and it's a competition I can't win." Sarah felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. "Marcus, what are you talking about? We're not in competition with each other. We're supposed to be partners." "Partners?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Sarah, do you know what happened while you were playing hero in the Gulf? Do you know what my career has looked like while my wife was collecting medals and making headlines?" "Tell me," Sarah said quietly. "I was passed over for promotion to captain," Marcus said, his voice thick with resentment. "The board said I needed more operational experience, more time at sea in positions of increased responsibility. Do you know what that means, Sarah?" Sarah's heart sank. She knew exactly what it meant. In the Navy's competitive promotion system, being passed over for captain was often a career-ending event. Most officers who failed to make captain were encouraged to retire rather than spend their remaining years in subordinate positions. Marcus, I'm sorry. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Marcus interrupted. You were too busy saving the world to worry about what was happening to your husband's career. Do you want to know what Admiral Richardson told me when I met with him today? Sarah nodded, though she was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. He told me that the Navy needed officers with operational experience, officers who had proven themselves in challenging assignments. He told me that my staff work was valuable, but that command positions went to officers who had demonstrated leadership under fire. Marcus's voice grew louder. Then he asked me if I'd ever considered requesting assignment to sea duty, maybe as executive officer on a destroyer or cruiser. That sounds like good advice, Sarah said carefully. Sea duty would give you the operational experience you need for promotion. Executive officer, Sarah, XO. Do you know what rank most XOs hold? Sarah closed her eyes, understanding the source of Marcus's humiliation. Lieutenant Commander. That's right. Admiral Richardson was essentially suggesting that I take a position 2 ranks below my current grade, serving under officers who might be my wife's former classmates or subordinates. Marcus began pacing the room like a caged animal. He was telling me that at 33 I need to start my career over while my wife commands ships and wins medals. Sarah reached out toward him. Marcus, there's no shame in sea duty. Some of our best officers have taken lateral assignments to gain experience. Don't, Marcus snapped, pulling away from her touch. Don't patronize me with talk about lateral assignments. We both know what this is. This is about the fact that everyone in the Navy knows that Sarah Mitchell is a better officer than Marcus Thornton. This is about the fact that my wife outshines me in every measurable way. That's not true, and you know it, Sarah replied, her own voice rising. You're a skilled staff officer with excellent political instincts. You understand the interface between military operations and civilian oversight better than anyone I know. That's a valuable skill set. Valuable enough to get me passed over for promotion, Marcus said bitterly. Valuable enough to make me the subject of whispered conversations at every officer function I attend. Do you know what Captain Williams said to me at the O Club last week? Sarah shook her head. He said, Marcus, you must be so proud of your wife's latest commendation. Another Bronze Star, right? You Thorntons sure know how to pick winners. Marcus's face flushed red at the memory. You Thorntons sure know how to pick winners. As if my only contribution to this marriage is having had the good sense to marry someone competent. Sarah stared at her husband, beginning to understand the depth of his resentment. Marcus, I never asked for those medals. I never sought recognition. I just did my job to the best of my ability. And therein lies the problem, Marcus replied. Your best is better than everyone else's best. Your just doing your job makes other officers look incompetent by comparison. Do you know what it's like to be introduced as Lieutenant Commander Mitchell's husband instead of Commander Thornton? I never introduced you that way. I've always been proud to be your wife. But that's how other people see me, Marcus said. That's how I'll always be seen as long as I'm married to the Navy's golden girl. I'll always be the supporting character in someone else's success story. Sarah felt tears beginning to form in her eyes. So what are you saying, Marcus? That you want me to be less successful? That you want me to turn down challenging assignments so that your career can advance? I'm saying that I want a wife who understands her role in supporting her husband's career, Marcus replied. I'm saying that I want a marriage where I'm the primary breadwinner, where I'm the one making command decisions, where I'm the one receiving recognition for my service. And if I can't be that wife? Marcus walked to his desk and picked up a manila envelope. Then maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing here. Sarah stared at the envelope, understanding its contents before Marcus even spoke. You want a divorce. I want a marriage that works, Marcus said. I want a partnership where both people can succeed without one constantly overshadowing the other. If you can't give me that, then yes, I think we should end this before it gets worse." Sarah reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were divorce papers, already prepared, already signed by Marcus. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and requested an equitable division of their limited shared assets. "You had these prepared while I was deployed," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had 18 months to think about our situation," Marcus replied. 18 months of being asked why I wasn't deployed with my wife, why I wasn't leading the kinds of missions that she was leading. 18 months of being known as the Pentagon staff officer married to the war hero. Sarah read through the documents, her training allowing her to process the legal language even as her heart was breaking. "You're keeping the house. It's in my name, and you'll be at sea most of the time anyway," Marcus said. "I've arranged for temporary quarters for you on base until you can make other arrangements." Sarah looked up from the papers. "Marcus, are you sure this is what you want? Are you sure that ending our marriage is worth whatever career advancement you think you'll gain?" Marcus met her eyes for the first time since she'd entered the house. "Sarah, I loved you. Part of me still loves you. But I can't live in your shadow anymore. I can't be married to someone who makes me feel small just by being herself. I never tried to make you feel small." "I know," Marcus said, his voice softer than it had been all evening. "That's what makes this so hard. You didn't set out to overshadow me. You just did what came naturally. You excelled at everything you touched. But excellence in a spouse is only attractive when it doesn't come at the cost of your own self-respect." Sarah stood slowly, the divorce papers still in her hands. "So this is it? 5 years of marriage, and you're throwing it away because you can't handle being married to someone successful?" "I'm freeing both of us from a situation that wasn't working," Marcus replied. "You deserve someone who can celebrate your success without feeling diminished by it. And I deserve someone who can support my career without overshadowing it." Sarah walked toward the bedroom to pack her belongings, then paused at the doorway. "Marcus, there's something you should know. Something that came through while I was deployed." Marcus looked up sharply. "What?" "I've been recommended for the Navy Cross," Sarah said quietly. "For the Al-Mansouri operation. The citation should be approved within the next few weeks." Marcus stared at her in shock. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor, awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. In the modern Navy, fewer than a dozen officers held the medal. "The Navy Cross," he repeated. "I wasn't supposed to tell anyone until it's official," Sarah continued. "But I thought you should know. I thought you should understand what you're walking away from." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "Congratulations, Sarah. You've achieved something I never could." "We could have achieved it together," Sarah replied. "I would have shared every honor, every recognition, every success with you. But you saw them as threats instead of triumphs." She went to the bedroom and began packing her uniforms and personal items. Each ribbon on her dress blues told a story of service and sacrifice, but now they felt like evidence of the failure of her marriage. As she folded her clothes, she could hear Marcus making phone calls in the living room, arranging for the divorce proceedings to move forward quickly. When she emerged with her packed sea bag, Marcus was waiting by the door. "Sarah, I want you to know that I respect what you've accomplished. I respect your service, your courage, your dedication. I can't be married to it anymore." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She walked toward her car, then turned back one final time. "Marcus, I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you find someone who makes you feel as important as you want to feel. And I hope you find someone who can handle being married to a hero," Marcus replied. As Sarah drove away from the house they had shared, She caught a glimpse of Marcus in her rearview mirror, standing in the doorway watching her leave. She wondered if he felt any regret, any doubt about the choice he was making. But she knew that their marriage had been doomed from the moment Marcus decided that her success was somehow incompatible with his happiness. The base housing office was closed at that hour, so Sarah drove to the bachelor officer's quarters and checked into a small temporary room. As she unpacked her uniforms and hung them in the narrow closet, she reflected on the irony of her situation. She was about to receive one of the nation's highest military honors, but she was spending the night alone in a room barely larger than her stateroom aboard ship. Her phone buzzed with a text from Commander Rodriguez. "Ma'am, I hope your homecoming went well. The crew is looking forward to working with you again when you get your next assignment." Sarah typed back, "Thank you, XO. Looking forward to getting back to sea." It was the truth. The Navy had given her purpose, identity, and the opportunity to serve something greater than herself. Her marriage was ending, but her career, her calling, continued. And tomorrow, she would begin the process of rebuilding her life around the only thing that had never let her down: her commitment to naval service and the sailors who depended on her leadership. Outside her window, the lights of Norfolk Harbor twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Navy ships continued their eternal watch over the sea lanes of the world. Soon, she would be back among them, back where she belonged, back where her value was measured not by her husband's insecurities, but by her ability to bring her sailors home safely from whatever dangers they might face. The divorce proceedings moved with military efficiency. Marcus had filed all the paperwork correctly, and since Sarah didn't contest any of his requests, the dissolution of their marriage was completed within 6 weeks. She kept her maiden name professionally. It was the name on all her commendations and fitness reports. But the legal separation from Marcus felt like losing part of her identity. During those 6 weeks, Sarah threw herself into her work with an intensity that both impressed and concerned her colleagues. She had been assigned as executive officer aboard the USS Valiant, a guided missile cruiser preparing for deployment to the Western Pacific. The XO position was traditionally a stepping stone to command, and Sarah was determined to prove that she deserved the opportunity to captain her own ship. The crew of the Valiant was initially skeptical of their new XO. The previous executive officer had been a popular leader with 18 years of naval service, and Sarah was young for the position, untested in the complex art of managing a crew of 300 sailors. Moreover, rumors about her divorce had spread through the tight-knit Navy community, along with whispers about her upcoming medal ceremony. But Sarah had learned early in her career that respect in the Navy was earned through actions, not words. She arrived aboard the Valiant 2 hours before the morning watch every day, studying the ship's systems, reviewing personnel records, and learning the names and backgrounds of every sailor under her command. She ate her meals in the crew's mess rather than the wardroom. She stood watch alongside junior officers during training exercises, and she made herself available to any sailor who needed guidance or support. Within 2 weeks, the crew's skepticism had transformed into curiosity. Within a month, curiosity had become respect. By the end of her second month aboard, the sailors of the Valiant would have followed Sarah Mitchell into any dangerous situation the Navy might ask them to face. The transformation wasn't easy. There were nights when Sarah lay in her small BOQ room, staring at the ceiling and wondering if Marcus had been right about her priorities. Maybe she was too focused on her career. Maybe she had failed as a wife. But every morning when she put on her uniform and walked aboard the Valiant, she remembered why she had chosen naval service in the first place. It wasn't for the medals or the recognition or the chance to prove herself against male colleagues. It was for the 20-year-old seaman who was sending half his paycheck home to support his family. It was for the young female petty officer who needed to see that women could rise to positions of command and authority. It was for the senior chief who had served for 26 years and deserved leaders who would use his experience wisely. Most of all, it was for the mission itself, the protection of American interests and allied shipping lanes, the deterrence of hostile nations, the maintenance of the delicate balance of power that kept the world's oceans open and free. 1 month after her divorce was finalized, Sarah received the call she had been expecting. "Commander Mitchell, this is Captain Williams from the Bureau of Naval Personnel. I have good news. The Secretary of the Navy has approved your Navy Cross recommendation. The ceremony is scheduled for next Friday at the Pentagon." Sarah sat down heavily in her stateroom chair. The Navy Cross. It was real. She was going to join the most exclusive club in the American military, the handful of officers who had been awarded the nation's second highest decoration for valor. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "I'm honored." "You should be, Commander. And Sarah, I heard about your personal situation. I want you to know that any officer in the fleet would be honored to serve with you, and any man would be lucky to have you as a partner. Don't let one small-minded fool make you doubt your worth." After Captain Williams hung up, Sarah sat in her stateroom holding the official notification. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism while serving as operations officer aboard USS Defiant during combat operations against armed pirates in the Arabian Gulf. Commander Mitchell displayed conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty, while leading a complex rescue operation that resulted in the safe recovery of 22 civilian hostages and the neutralization of multiple armed hostiles. Her exceptional tactical leadership and personal courage under fire reflect the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." She thought about Marcus, probably working late at his Pentagon desk, convinced that he had made the right choice in ending their marriage. She wondered if he would hear about the Navy Cross, if he would understand what he had walked away from. But more than that, she thought about the 22 hostages who were alive because she had made the choice to act, and she knew that she wouldn't change anything about that night, even if it had cost her marriage. The medal ceremony at the Pentagon was a formal affair, attended by senior officers from throughout the Navy. Sarah stood at attention as the Secretary of the Navy read the citation and placed the distinctive blue and white ribbon around her neck. In the audience, she could see Admiral Richardson, Captain Williams, and dozens of other officers who had shaped her career. After the ceremony, Admiral Richardson approached her. "Commander Mitchell, congratulations on a well-deserved honor. I trust you're settling in well aboard the Valiant?" "Yes, sir. The crew has been exceptional, and Captain Harris is an outstanding commanding officer." Admiral Richardson smiled. "Captain Harris tells me you're one of the finest XOs he's worked with. He's recommended you for early selection to captain and command of your own ship." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Early selection for captain was rare, reserved for only the most outstanding officers. And command, the chance to be responsible for her own ship and crew, was the dream of every naval officer. "Sir, I'm honored by Captain Harris's confidence in me." "It's not just Captain Harris," Admiral Richardson replied. "The entire Pacific Fleet leadership has been watching your career with interest. You've demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership and tactical acumen we need in our commanding officers." As Sarah drove back to Norfolk that evening, wearing the Navy Cross for the first time, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had gone from a woman whose marriage was failing because of her success to an officer being groomed for command. The divorce that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the most important chapter of her career. But the most significant test was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Sarah was in her stateroom reviewing training schedules when her phone rang. It was her friend and former Academy roommate, Commander Lisa Chen, calling from her assignment in San Diego. "Sarah, I just heard some interesting news through the Naval Intelligence grapevine. You might want to sit down for this." "What kind of news?" Sarah asked. "Marcus is getting married again. Admiral Richardson's daughter, Catherine. And here's the kicker. He's planning the wedding for next month at the Naval Academy Chapel. Full military honors, the whole 9 yards." Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. Well, I hope they'll be happy together. There's more, Lisa continued. I heard from someone who knows someone who works in the wedding planning office. Marcus specifically requested that his ex-wife be invited to the ceremony. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. He what? You heard me. He wants you there, Sarah. He wants you to watch him marry Admiral Richardson's daughter in front of the entire Norfolk naval community. Sarah sat back in her chair, trying to process this information. Marcus wanted to parade his new wife in front of her, to demonstrate his success in finding someone appropriate for his career aspirations. He probably expected her to decline, to stay away in shame and defeat. Lisa, that's the most petty, vindictive thing I've ever heard. It gets worse. Catherine Richardson is everything you're not. She's blonde. She's beautiful in that society page way. She comes from a Navy family but has never served herself. And she's apparently already making noises about how she plans to support her husband's career by being the perfect Navy wife. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. You know what, Lisa? Good for her. If that's what Marcus needs to feel important, then I hope she can give it to him. So you're not going to the wedding? Sarah thought about the invitation that would probably arrive within the next few days. She thought about Marcus's intention to humiliate her, to show the naval community that he had upgraded to a more suitable wife. She thought about the whispers and speculation that would follow if she attended, and the assumptions people would make if she stayed away. Actually, Sarah said slowly, I think I am going to the wedding. Sarah, are you crazy? Why would you put yourself through that? Because I'm tired of apologizing for my success, Sarah replied. I'm tired of letting other people make me feel bad about my achievements. Marcus wants to show off his new wife to prove that he's moved on to bigger and better things. Fine. Let him see what he actually walked away from. You mean you want to show up in dress blues with your Navy Cross and remind everyone exactly what kind of officer you are? Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Something like that. But not for revenge, Lisa. For truth. For the truth about who I am and what I've accomplished, regardless of who that makes uncomfortable. Over the next 2 weeks, as Sarah waited for the invitation to arrive, she continued her duties aboard the Valiant with renewed focus and energy. The ship was preparing for a challenging Pacific deployment, with scheduled exercises involving Allied navies and potential responses to emerging threats in the South China Sea. During this period, Sarah received another surprise, orders for her next assignment. She was being promoted to captain and given command of the USS Phoenix, a newly commissioned destroyer that would be homeported in Pearl Harbor. At 31, she would be one of the youngest commanding officers in the Pacific Fleet. When Captain Harris called her to his cabin to deliver the news personally, he could barely contain his pride. Sarah, in 28 years of naval service, I've never written a fitness report that gave me more pleasure than yours. You've transformed this crew, improved our operational readiness, and demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes commanding officers look good. The Phoenix is lucky to get you. Thank you, sir. Serving as your XO has been the highlight of my career. Captain Harris smiled. I suspect that's about to change. Command is different, Sarah. It's lonely sometimes, and the responsibility is absolute. But for officers like you, officers who understand that leadership is about service, not ego, it's the most fulfilling experience the Navy can offer. That evening, as Sarah packed her belongings in preparation for her transfer to Pearl Harbor, the invitation finally arrived. It was exactly as Lisa had described. Thick, cream-colored paper with elegant calligraphy announcing the marriage of Commander Marcus Thornton and Miss Catherine Richardson at the Naval Academy Chapel. Sarah stared at the invitation for a long time, remembering her own wedding in that same chapel 5 years earlier. She remembered the hope she had felt that day, the certainty that she and Marcus were building something lasting and meaningful together. Now, that same chapel would witness Marcus's marriage to someone else, someone he believed would be a more suitable partner for a naval officer's career. But as Sarah looked at the invitation, she didn't feel sadness or regret. She felt something unexpected: gratitude. Marcus had done her a favor by ending their marriage. He had freed her to become the officer she was meant to be without having to apologize for her success or diminish herself to protect his ego. Tomorrow, she would drive to Washington to attend the wedding. She would wear her dress blues with full decorations, including the Navy Cross that marked her as one of the most decorated officers of her generation. She would represent the truth of who she was and what she had achieved, regardless of who that made uncomfortable. And then she would drive to Pearl Harbor to take command of her own ship, to lead her own crew, to write the next chapter of a naval career that was just beginning to reach its full potential. The Naval Academy Chapel on a crisp Saturday morning in October was exactly as Sarah remembered it from her own wedding 6 years earlier. The Gothic architecture reached toward heaven like prayers made of stone, and the autumn sunlight filtered through stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the wooden pews and marble floors. It was a place where tradition lived in every carved detail, where generations of naval officers had made sacred vows before God and country. Sarah arrived 30 minutes before the ceremony, driving her modest Honda Civic through the academy gates with the same sense of reverence she had felt as a midshipman. She wore her dress blue uniform with full decorations, every ribbon arranged in perfect military precision, her brass polished to mirror brightness, and the Navy Cross hanging prominently below her left shoulder, its distinctive blue and white ribbon immediately recognizable to anyone with military knowledge. She had spent extra time that morning ensuring her appearance met the highest standards of naval protocol. This wasn't vanity. It was respect for the uniform and what it represented. Her shoes were polished to a mirror shine that would pass any inspection. Her white gloves were spotless, and every piece of brass gleamed under the chapel lights. She looked like what she was: a highly decorated naval officer at the absolute pinnacle of professional excellence. As she walked up the chapel steps, Sarah noticed the looks from other arriving guests. Some were curious. Who was this woman wearing so many combat decorations? Others showed recognition from fellow officers who knew her reputation and recent medal ceremony. A few faces registered surprise and discomfort, people who knew about her history with Marcus and wondered why she was there. But Sarah walked with the quiet confidence that came from years of naval service, the bearing of an officer who had faced enemy fire and emerged victorious. She wasn't here to cause drama or seek revenge. She was here to represent the truth of who she was and what she had accomplished, regardless of who that might make uncomfortable. The chapel was filling rapidly with Norfolk's naval elite. Marcus had spared no expense on what was clearly intended to be the social event of the year. Honor guards flanked the altar, their ceremonial swords gleaming under the lights. A full Navy band was positioned in the balcony, their instruments ready to provide traditional wedding music. The first several rows were filled with admirals, captains, and senior officers from throughout the Atlantic Fleet. Sarah took a seat in the middle section, neither hiding in the back nor claiming a prominent position up front. She sat with perfect military posture, hands folded in her lap, projecting the calm professionalism that had made her one of the Navy's most respected officers. Around her, she could hear fragments of conversation as people noticed her presence and tried to piece together the story. "Is that Commander Mitchell? The one who won the Navy Cross? What's she doing here? Isn't this her ex-husband's wedding? Look at those ribbons. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross. Jesus. I heard she's getting her own command. Destroyer, I think." Admiral Richardson arrived with his family, his wife elegant in designer clothing and his daughter Catherine absolutely radiant in what was clearly a very expensive wedding gown. Catherine Richardson was beautiful in every conventional sense. Blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo, delicate features that belonged on magazine covers, and the kind of refined elegance that graced society page photographs. She looked exactly like what Marcus had always wanted, a woman who would complement his career rather than compete with it, someone who understood that her role was to support her husband's ambitions rather than pursue her own. Catherine had never served in the military, had never faced enemy fire, had never made life-or-death decisions under pressure. But she had something that Marcus valued more than courage or competence. She would never make him feel small by comparison. Then Marcus appeared at the altar, flanked by his groomsman and best man. He wore his dress white uniform with the gold shoulder boards and insignia of his rank, looking every inch the successful naval officer he had always wanted to be seen as. His uniform was perfect, his bearing confident, his smile radiant, as he prepared to marry the admiral's daughter in front of the entire Norfolk naval establishment. But as the congregation rose for Catherine's entrance, Marcus's eyes swept across the assembled guests and found Sarah. For a moment that seemed to last an eternity, their eyes met across the crowded chapel. Sarah saw shock register on Marcus's face, followed quickly by anger, then something that might have been fear. He was clearly unprepared for her presence, despite having sent the invitation himself. Perhaps he had expected her to decline, to stay away in shame or defeat. Perhaps he had forgotten exactly what kind of officer he had divorced, exactly what he had walked away from. The woman sitting calmly in the middle of his wedding chapel wasn't the broken, apologetic wife he remembered. This was Captain Select Sarah Mitchell, decorated war hero, future commanding officer, one of the Navy's rising stars. Sarah simply nodded politely, the kind of respectful acknowledgement one military officer gives another. She wasn't smiling in triumph or glaring in anger. She was simply present, representing the truth of who she was and what she had achieved. Catherine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her wedding dress a masterpiece of silk and lace that probably cost more than most sailors made in 6 months. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale, exactly the kind of woman who appeared in Navy wife magazines and promotional materials. But as she passed Sarah's row, something in her expression changed. Her eyes met Sarah's for just a moment, and in that instant, Catherine seemed to understand exactly who she was looking at. The ceremony proceeded according to naval tradition and religious custom. Marcus and Catherine exchanged vows about love, honor, and supporting each other through whatever challenges military life might bring. The chaplain spoke about the sacred nature of marriage and the particular demands placed on military families. The honor guard performed their ceremonial duties with precision, and the Navy band provided appropriately solemn music. But throughout the ceremony, Sarah noticed an undercurrent of tension that had nothing to do with normal wedding nerves. Marcus kept glancing in her direction, his confidence clearly shaken by her presence. Catherine seemed increasingly subdued as the ceremony progressed, as if she was beginning to understand something that troubled her. Even Admiral Richardson appeared thoughtful, his eyes occasionally finding Sarah in the congregation. During the exchange of rings, something unexpected happened. As Catherine repeated her vows, her voice caught with emotion that seemed to go beyond normal wedding sentiment. Sarah watched closely and realized that the bride was crying, not tears of joy, but tears of something deeper and more complicated. It occurred to Sarah that Catherine might be having doubts of her own. Perhaps she was beginning to understand what kind of man she was marrying. Someone who could end a 5-year marriage because his ego couldn't handle his wife's success. Perhaps she was wondering what other truths Marcus might have omitted from his version of their relationship. The chaplain pronounced Marcus and Catherine husband and wife, and the congregation applauded as they kissed. Military tradition called for the couple to exit under a ceremonial arch of swords, held by Marcus's fellow officers. But as the new couple turned to face their guests, Marcus's eyes immediately found Sarah again. This time, the shock on his face was even more pronounced. In the months since their divorce, He had somehow managed to minimize Sarah's achievements in his own mind, to convince himself that he had made the right choice in trading her for Catherine. But seeing her now, in her dress blues with the Navy Cross and the quiet confidence of an officer who had proven herself in combat, he was confronted with the reality of what he had walked away from. The recessional proceeded, but the atmosphere in the chapel had shifted dramatically. Instead of pure celebration, there was an undercurrent of curiosity and speculation. Who was the decorated officer who had captured the groom's attention? Why did the bride look increasingly troubled? What was the story behind the obvious tension? The reception was held in the Academy's magnificent Bancroft Hall, the massive building that housed the entire brigade of midshipmen during the academic year. For this occasion, it had been transformed into an elegant ballroom, with round tables covered in white linens, centerpieces of white roses and baby's breath, and a dance floor that gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Sarah had initially planned to skip the reception, feeling that her presence at the ceremony had accomplished what she intended. But as she walked toward the parking lot, she reconsidered. Leaving immediately after the ceremony would look like retreat, and Sarah Mitchell had never retreated from anything in her life. The reception was everything one would expect for the wedding of a senior officer to an admiral's daughter. There was a receiving line where the new couple greeted their guests, a head table for the wedding party and their families, and elaborate floral arrangements that probably cost more than most enlisted sailors' annual salary. Sarah found herself seated at a table with several other commanders and captains, most of whom she knew professionally. The conversation was initially awkward, with everyone clearly aware of the unusual situation but uncertain how to address it. But Sarah's natural professionalism and the respect her fellow officers had for her service gradually eased the tension. "Sarah," said Captain Rodriguez, her former commanding officer, "congratulations on the Phoenix command. She's a beautiful ship, and you're going to do great things with her." "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to the challenge." "The crew is lucky to have you," added Commander Williams. "After what you accomplished on the Defiant and the Valiant, you've more than proven yourself ready for command." As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed that she was becoming something of a center of attention. Officers who had heard about her recent decoration and upcoming command came to her table to offer congratulations and ask about her experiences. Young female officers sought her out, eager to learn from someone who had broken through barriers and achieved command rank. But the most significant conversation of the evening came from an unexpected source. As Sarah was finishing her dinner, Admiral Richardson himself approached her table. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and the kind of bearing that came from decades of command authority. His presence commanded immediate respect from everyone within sight. "Captain Mitchell," he said, using her future rank, "may I have a word with you?" Sarah stood immediately. "Of course, sir." They walked to a quieter corner of the reception hall, away from the crowds and music. Admiral Richardson studied her for a moment before speaking. "I've been hearing a great deal about you lately, Captain. Your reputation precedes you, and that's quite an impressive array of decorations you're wearing tonight." "Thank you, sir. I've been fortunate to serve with exceptional officers and crews." Admiral Richardson smiled slightly. "I've read the after-action reports from the Al-Mansouri operation. That was considerably more than good fortune, Captain. That was exceptional leadership under the most challenging circumstances." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but kept her voice steady. "I had an outstanding team, sir. The credit belongs to all of them." "Spoken like a true leader," Admiral Richardson replied. "Tell me about your plans for the Phoenix. What are your priorities as a new commanding officer?" For the next 10 minutes, Sarah found herself in an impromptu interview with one of the Navy's most senior admirals. They discussed her tactical philosophy, her approach to crew training, her thoughts on emerging threats in the Pacific theater, and her vision for the Phoenix's role in the fleet. Admiral Richardson was clearly impressed. "Captain, in my experience, The best commanding officers are those who understand that leadership is about service, not ego. You clearly understand that principle. It's what the Navy taught me, sir. It's what every good officer I've served under has demonstrated. As their conversation continued, Sarah became aware that they were being watched. Across the room, Marcus was trying to participate in the traditional wedding activities while clearly distracted by the sight of his ex-wife deep in conversation with his new father-in-law. Catherine, too, seemed to be watching, her expression troubled and thoughtful. Finally, Admiral Richardson concluded their conversation. "Captain, I suspect we'll be working together in the future. The Pacific Fleet needs officers with your experience and judgment. Don't be surprised if you find yourself with expanded responsibilities sooner than you might expect." As the Admiral walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and vindication. One of the Navy's most senior officers had not only recognized her achievements, but had essentially endorsed her future prospects. The same accomplishments that Marcus had resented were being celebrated by the people who really mattered in the Navy hierarchy. But the evening wasn't over yet. As the reception continued with traditional elements like the cake cutting and first dance, Sarah noticed Catherine Richardson, now Catherine Thornton, watching her from across the room. The new bride had changed from her wedding gown into an elegant cocktail dress, but she still looked troubled, almost haunted. During a lull in the festivities, Catherine approached Sarah's table. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "You're Sarah Mitchell, aren't you? Marcus's former wife?" Sarah stood respectfully. "Yes, I am. And you're Mrs. Thornton now. Congratulations. You looked beautiful today, and I hope you'll be very happy together." Catherine glanced around nervously, as if checking to see who might be listening. Could we speak privately for a moment? There's a terrace just outside these doors." Sarah was surprised by the request, but curious. Of course. They walked out onto the stone terrace that overlooked the Severn River. The evening was crisp and clear, with the lights of Annapolis twinkling across the water like fallen stars. In the distance, they could see the running lights of ships moving through the harbor, the eternal traffic of a naval base that never slept. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the water. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He told me you were a failure as a wife. He told me you cared more about your career than your marriage. He told me you were selfish and ambitious and that you made him feel like he wasn't enough." Sarah said nothing, waiting to see where this conversation was going. Catherine continued, still not looking at Sarah. "But watching you tonight, seeing your decorations, listening to what my father said about your service, I'm starting to wonder if Marcus told me the truth about anything." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Thornton, I can only speak to my own experience. My marriage to Marcus ended because we had fundamentally different ideas about what a partnership should look like. I believed we should celebrate each other's successes. He felt threatened by mine." "The Navy Cross," Catherine said, finally turning to look at Sarah. "That's for extraordinary heroism, isn't it? You saved lives?" "I was part of a team that saved lives, yes. 22 civilian hostages who would have died if we hadn't acted." Catherine's voice grew even quieter. "He called you a failed officer. But you're one of the most decorated people here tonight, aren't you? People keep approaching my father asking about Marcus's ex-wife, the war hero." Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for this young woman who was beginning to realize what kind of man she had just married. "Catherine, I hope your marriage will be different. I hope Marcus has learned and grown from our experience. People can change." Catherine looked back out over the water. "Can they? Because 3 weeks ago, I mentioned that I was thinking about going back to school, maybe getting my master's degree in international relations. Do you know what he said?" Sarah had a sinking feeling about where this was going. "What did he say?" "He said that Navy wives don't need graduate degrees. He said my job was to support his career, not build my own. He said that's what went wrong with his first marriage. His wife forgot her place. Catherine's voice was bitter now. Forgot her place, as if wanting to contribute something meaningful to the world was somehow inappropriate. Sarah closed her eyes. Marcus hadn't changed at all. He had simply found someone he thought would be more compliant, more willing to diminish herself for his comfort. "I'm sorry, Catherine. That must have been difficult to hear." Catherine's voice strengthened slightly. "It was. And seeing you tonight, understanding what he walked away from, it makes me wonder what else he's been dishonest about." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the lights reflect on the dark water. A Navy patrol boat moved slowly through the harbor, its searchlight sweeping the shoreline in the eternal vigilance that protected the base. Finally, Catherine spoke again. "I don't think I can be the kind of wife he wants me to be. I don't think I can make myself small enough to make him feel big." Sarah turned to look at the young woman beside her. "You shouldn't have to. The right partner will want you to be the biggest, brightest version of yourself. They'll celebrate your successes, not resent them." Catherine nodded slowly. "I think I'm beginning to understand that. My father thinks very highly of you, you know. He told me that officers like you are the future of the Navy, that you represent everything the service should aspire to be. Your father is very kind." "He's also very honest," Catherine replied. "He doesn't give praise lightly. And watching Marcus's reaction to seeing you tonight, I think he's realizing what he gave up." As they prepared to return to the reception, Catherine stopped and faced Sarah directly. "Can I ask you something? Do you regret your divorce?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I regret that our marriage couldn't survive my success. I regret that Marcus saw my achievements as threats rather than triumphs. But do I regret being free to become the officer I was meant to be? No, I don't regret that at all." Catherine smiled sadly. "I think I understand." As they walked back inside, Sarah felt an unexpected sense of closure. She had come to this wedding uncertain of her motivations, unsure whether she was seeking vindication or simply the chance to face her past with dignity. But talking to Catherine had clarified something important. This wasn't really about Marcus at all. It was about refusing to accept someone else's definition of her worth. It was about standing up for the principle that success should be celebrated, not apologized for. It was about showing other women, other officers, that they didn't have to choose between professional achievement and personal fulfillment. As the evening wound down, Sarah prepared to leave. She had accomplished everything she had come for. She had faced her past with dignity. She had connected with Catherine, who clearly needed perspective, and she had reminded herself and everyone else exactly who she was and what she stood for. But as she walked toward the exit, Marcus intercepted her. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "we need to talk." She turned to face him, noting how different he looked from the confident groom of earlier that evening. His dress whites were still immaculate, but his face was strained, his eyes troubled, and there was something desperate in his expression that she had never seen before. "Hello, Marcus. Congratulations on your wedding. Catherine seems like a lovely woman." Marcus glanced around nervously, making sure they couldn't be overheard by the other guests. "What are you doing here, Sarah? What game are you playing?" Sarah's voice remained calm and professional. "I'm not playing any games. You invited me, remember? You said you wanted me to see what a proper Navy marriage looked like. I didn't expect—" Marcus gestured vaguely at her uniform, her decorations, the Navy cross that marked her as one of the elite. "I didn't know about all of this. When did all this happen?" "The Navy Cross ceremony was last month at the Pentagon," Sarah replied evenly. "For the Al-Mansouri operation. You know, the one where you said I was playing hero instead of being a proper wife." Marcus's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Sarah, I never meant—" "You meant exactly what you said," Sarah interrupted gently but firmly. You meant that my dedication to duty was a threat to your ego. You meant that my success made you feel inadequate. And you know what, Marcus? You were right about one thing. Marcus looked up sharply. What? I could never be the kind of wife you wanted. I could never make myself small enough to make you feel big, and I'm grateful for that now, because it means I got to save 22 lives instead of spending my time worrying about protecting your feelings. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, and Sarah could see the war being fought behind his eyes, pride battling with regret, ego wrestling with the dawning realization of what he had lost. The crew always respected you more than me, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Even when we were married, even when you were technically under my rank, everyone knew you were the better officer. Do you know what that was like? Do you know how it felt to be known as Sarah Mitchell's husband instead of Commander Marcus Thornton? Sarah's expression softened slightly. Marcus, I never asked anyone to define you by our marriage. I never wanted you to feel diminished. I just wanted us to be partners who celebrated each other's achievements. But your achievements were always bigger, Marcus said, his voice cracking with the weight of years of resentment. Your missions, your medals, your reputation. What was I supposed to do with that? How was I supposed to compete with a war hero? You were supposed to be proud, Sarah replied simply. You were supposed to stand beside me and say, that's my wife, the hero. Instead, you decided I was the problem that needed to be solved. Marcus looked down at his hands, his perfect uniform suddenly seeming like a costume that no longer fit. I heard about your new assignment, command of the USS Phoenix. A destroyer, right? Sarah nodded. The orders came through last week. I'll be the youngest female commanding officer in the Pacific Fleet. And probably not the last, Marcus said with a bitter smile. You're going to make admiral someday, aren't you? Flag rank, maybe even CNO if you want it badly enough. Maybe, Sarah replied honestly, if I continue to serve well and if the Navy sees fit to promote me. But Marcus, none of that was ever about you. It was about serving my country, about being the best officer I could be, about living up to the oath we both took. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the last few guests saying their goodbyes and heading toward the parking lot. Catherine asked me about you tonight. She wanted to know why I never mentioned your decorations, your achievements. She asked if I was ashamed of being married to a hero. What did you tell her? I told her it was complicated, Marcus said, his voice hollow. But looking at you tonight, seeing you in your dress blues with that Navy cross, talking to Admiral Richardson like you belong at that level, I think I was just ashamed of myself. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for the man she had once loved, the ambitious young officer who had somehow lost his way in the maze of his own insecurities. Marcus, you're a good officer. You've had a successful career. You don't need to diminish others to feel worthwhile. But I do, Marcus said quietly, and for the first time since she had known him, he was being completely honest. That's the problem, isn't it? I need to be the star, the center of attention. I need everyone to look at me and be impressed. And you never needed any of that. You just served with honor and let your actions speak for themselves. That's what we're trained to do, Sarah replied. Lead by example, serve with humility, put the mission and the crew before personal glory. Those aren't just words in the Navy creed, Marcus. They're supposed to guide how we live our lives. Marcus laughed bitterly. I forgot those lessons somewhere along the way, didn't I? I got so focused on advancement, on making the right connections, on being seen with the right people, that I lost sight of why I became an officer in the first place. It's not too late, Sarah said gently. You have a new wife, a fresh start. Maybe this is your chance to remember what really matters. Marcus looked back toward the reception hall, where Catherine was visible through the windows, talking with her father and looking increasingly serious about whatever they were discussing. She's smart, Sarah, smarter than I gave her credit for. And tonight, talking to her father, listening to other officers talk about your career. I think she's starting to understand what kind of man she married. What kind of man is that, Marcus? The kind who throws away a diamond because he's too insecure to appreciate its value, Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. The kind who chooses comfortable mediocrity over challenging excellence. The kind who would rather tear down his partner than face his own limitations. Sarah studied her ex-husband's face, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in their entire relationship. Gone was the swagger and confidence, the careful political positioning and calculated charm. What remained was simply a man confronting the consequences of his choices. You can still change, Sarah said. You can still become the officer and the husband you're capable of being. But you have to want it for the right reasons, not just because it makes you look good to others. Marcus nodded slowly, like a man accepting a verdict he couldn't appeal. I owe you an apology, Sarah, a real one. Not for divorcing you. Maybe that was inevitable given who we both are. But for the way I did it, for the things I said, for trying to make you feel guilty about being exceptional at what you do. Apology accepted, Sarah replied without hesitation. And Marcus, I hope you and Catherine find happiness together. Real happiness, built on mutual respect and support, not on one person diminishing themselves for the other's comfort. Marcus extended his hand, and Sarah shook it firmly. Congratulations on the Navy Cross, and on your new command. The Navy is lucky to have you, and I was a fool not to realize it. Thank you. That means more than you know. As Marcus walked back toward the reception to find his new wife, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The conversation had provided closure she hadn't known she needed. He had finally acknowledged what they both knew to be true, that their marriage had failed not because she was too ambitious, but because he was too insecure to be married to someone whose light shone brighter than his own. But more importantly, she had faced her past without anger or bitterness. She had represented herself and her service with dignity, she had helped a young woman gain perspective on her situation, and she had demonstrated that success should never be apologized for. Outside the Naval Academy chapel, Sarah paused to look back at the Gothic building where she had been married 6 years earlier, and where she had just witnessed her ex-husband's wedding to someone else. The ancient spires reached toward the stars, eternal and unchanging, witnesses to countless vows of love and commitment, some that would endure, others that would crumble under the weight of human frailty. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa Chen. How did it go? Are you okay? Do I need to drive up there and bail you out of jail? Sarah smiled as she typed back, I'm more than okay. I'm free. As she drove away from Annapolis, heading back toward Norfolk and the ship that awaited her, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just 1 year. She had gone from a woman apologizing for her success to an officer wearing the Navy Cross. She had gone from a marriage that diminished her to a career that celebrated her achievements. She had gone from being someone's disappointed ex-wife to being the future commanding officer of one of the Navy's most advanced destroyers. The USS Phoenix awaited in Pearl Harbor, along with the challenges and opportunities of command. There would be young officers to mentor, complex missions to plan, sailors to lead through whatever dangers the Navy might ask them to face. It was exactly the life she had dreamed of when she first put on the uniform as a newly commissioned ensign. But the night wasn't quite over yet. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah was settling into her new role as commanding officer of the USS Phoenix when she received an unexpected call. She was in her cabin reviewing the ship's training schedule when her yeoman announced that she had a call from Admiral Richardson. Captain Mitchell, I hope you're settling in well aboard the Phoenix. I've been hearing excellent reports about your command performance. Thank you, Admiral. The crew has been exceptional, and we're ahead of schedule on our training objectives. Admiral Richardson's voice grew more serious. Captain, I'm calling about a personal matter that intersects with professional concerns. I wanted to inform you that my daughter has filed for divorce from Commander Thornton." Sarah was quiet for a moment, absorbing this information. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I hope she's doing well." "She's doing very well, actually," Admiral Richardson replied. "She's enrolled in graduate school at Georgetown, studying international relations just as she had wanted to do. And she tells me it was your conversation at the wedding that helped her realize she didn't have to make herself small to accommodate someone else's insecurities." Sarah smiled slightly. "She's an intelligent young woman, sir. I'm sure she would have reached that conclusion on her own." "Perhaps, but your example gave her the courage to act on it." "Catherine told me that seeing you at the wedding, successful, decorated, uncompromising in your excellence, made her realize what she was giving up by trying to fit into Marcus's narrow definition of an appropriate wife. I'm glad she's pursuing her education, sir. The Navy needs officers and civilians who understand the complexities of international relations." Admiral Richardson chuckled. "Actually, Catherine is considering a commission herself. She's been inspired by your example to think about military service. It seems that Marcus's attempt to humiliate you had the opposite effect. It inspired my daughter to pursue her own path of service and excellence." After the call ended, Sarah reflected on the unexpected consequences of that difficult evening 6 months earlier. What Marcus had intended as a demonstration of his superior choice in wives had instead become a catalyst for Catherine's personal growth and independence. But the story wasn't finished yet. 3 years later, Captain Sarah Mitchell stood on the bridge of the USS Phoenix as it cut through the Pacific swells toward Pearl Harbor, returning from a successful deployment to the Western Pacific. Under her command, the Phoenix had participated in joint exercises with Allied navies, conducted freedom of navigation operations in disputed waters, and earned recognition as one of the most combat-ready ships in the Pacific Fleet. Her crew had learned to respect their commanding officer's demanding standards and unwavering commitment to excellence. She was tough but fair, brilliant but approachable, and absolutely dedicated to their safety and success. Word had spread throughout the fleet about Captain Mitchell's innovative training methods and tactical innovations. "Captain," her operations officer called out, "we're receiving a priority message from Pacific Fleet Command." Sarah walked over to review the message. It was notification of her selection for Rear Admiral and orders to assume command of Destroyer Squadron 7, one of the most prestigious surface warfare commands in the Navy. At 34, she would be one of the youngest flag officers in naval history. As she read the orders, Sarah's executive officer, a sharp young commander named Catherine Richardson Mitchell, who had graduated from the Naval Academy 2 years earlier and had specifically requested assignment to Sarah's ship, approached with a smile. "Congratulations, Admiral. Well deserved." Sarah looked at the young woman who had become like a younger sister to her. Catherine had not only completed her master's degree, but had also received her commission through Officer Candidate School, choosing to keep her maiden name professionally and adding Mitchell as a tribute to the woman who had inspired her career change. "Thank you, XO, but this ship and this crew taught me as much as I taught them. Command is a privilege, not a reward." Catherine nodded seriously. "I'm learning that every day, ma'am. Thank you for showing me what leadership looks like." That evening, as Sarah sat in her cabin writing her acceptance of the new orders, she thought about the path that had brought her here. The divorce that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the most fulfilling chapter of her career. The man who had told her she didn't know her place had inadvertently freed her to find her true place among the Navy's senior leadership, inspiring and mentoring the next generation of naval officers. Her phone rang. It was Admiral Richardson, now Pacific Fleet Commander. "Admiral Mitchell," he said, using her new rank, "congratulations on your selection for flag rank. The ceremony is scheduled for next month in Pearl Harbor. I'll be proud to administer your oath of office." "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the Navy's confidence in me." "You've earned it," Admiral Richardson replied. But I'm not calling just about your promotion. I wanted to tell you that Catherine has been selected for promotion to lieutenant commander and assignment as executive officer aboard the USS Defender. She's following in your footsteps quite successfully. Sarah smiled. She's an outstanding officer, sir. She's going to make an excellent XO. She credits you with inspiring her to pursue naval service, Admiral Richardson said, and I want to thank you for being such a positive influence on her life. You showed her that women can achieve anything in the military if they're willing to work for it. She did the work herself, sir. I just provided an example. Admiral Richardson was quiet for a moment. Sarah, can I speak frankly? Of course, sir. Marcus made the biggest mistake of his career when he let you go. He gave up a partnership with one of the finest officers I've ever known in pursuit of an ego boost that was never going to be enough. I hope he's learned something from the experience. After Admiral Richardson hung up, Sarah walked out onto the weather deck of her ship. The Pacific stretched endlessly in all directions, dark water under a canopy of stars. Somewhere out there were challenges and opportunities she couldn't yet imagine, responsibilities that would test her leadership at the highest levels of naval command. But she was ready for all of it. She wore the uniform with pride, served with honor, and commanded with the knowledge that she had earned every star on her collar and every ribbon on her chest. The woman Marcus had called a failed officer was now being groomed for the highest levels of flag rank, for the stars of a senior admiral. As she stood there, feeling the ship move beneath her feet and breathing the salt air of the open ocean, Sarah whispered a prayer of gratitude, not for the pain of her divorce, but for the strength it had revealed in her, and for the life of service and purpose it had ultimately made possible. Tatur, Epilogue. The Legacy. 5 years later, Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium of the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, delivering the keynote address to a graduating class of senior officers. Her shoulder boards bore the 2 stars of a rear admiral, and her chest displayed ribbons from 4 continents and 3 dozen operations. In the audience sat hundreds of the Navy's most experienced leaders, but Sarah's eyes found several familiar faces. Catherine Richardson Mitchell, now a commander serving as executive officer of a guided missile cruiser. Lisa Chen, recently promoted to captain and commanding her own ship. And in the back row, she noticed a graying Commander Marcus Thornton, who had never advanced beyond his current rank and was serving out his final years in a staff position at the War College. After the ceremony, several young officers approached Sarah with questions about leadership, career development, and breaking through barriers in military service. But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. As Sarah was gathering her notes, Marcus approached the podium. He looked older than his years, with gray at his temples and the bearing of a man who had learned hard lessons about life and leadership. Admiral Mitchell, he said formally, congratulations on an excellent address. Your insights on adaptive leadership were particularly valuable. Sarah turned to face her former husband, noting the genuine respect in his voice. Thank you, Commander. I hope the students found it useful. Marcus nodded, then spoke more quietly. Sarah, I wonder if I could have a moment of your time. There's something I've wanted to say for a long time. They walked to a quiet corner of the auditorium, away from the departing crowd. Marcus seemed to gather himself before speaking. I've spent the last 8 years thinking about our marriage, about the choices I made, about the man I was then compared to the man I've tried to become, he said. I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. Not just a marriage, but a partnership with someone who exemplified everything the Navy stands for. Sarah listened quietly, seeing a sincerity in Marcus that had been absent during their marriage. I've watched your career from a distance, Marcus continued. The Phoenix Command, your promotion to flag rank, your influence on the next generation of officers. You've become everything I once claimed I wanted to be, and you did it through the qualities I was too insecure to appreciate. Integrity, courage, dedication to something larger than yourself. Marcus, We've both grown since then. You've served honorably in your assignments. Marcus shook his head. Adequately, perhaps, but never with the distinction you've achieved. I let my ego blind me to what really mattered. I thought military service was about personal advancement, about being recognized and rewarded. You understood it was about service itself, about making a difference regardless of who got the credit. He paused, looking out the window at the Naval War College grounds where future military leaders were being trained. Catherine and our marriage lasted less than 2 years. She's doing well now. She's a commander herself, serving with distinction in the Mediterranean. She learned from your example what I was too stubborn to understand. I'm glad she found her path. She did, no thanks to me, Marcus replied. I made the same mistakes with her that I made with you, trying to diminish her ambitions to protect my ego. But she was stronger than I was. She left before I could damage her the way I damaged us. Sarah felt a mix of sadness and resolution. Marcus, I don't carry any anger about our marriage. We were both young, both trying to figure out how to balance personal relationships with military service. You weren't ready for the partnership I needed, and I wasn't willing to be less than who I was. And thank God for that, Marcus said with feeling. If you had compromised yourself for my insecurities, the Navy would have lost one of its finest leaders. Those young officers in there today are better prepared for their careers because of your example. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the windows as students and faculty moved across the historic campus. Sarah, I have one more thing to tell you, Marcus said. I'm retiring next month. 30 years of service, but I know I've reached the end of my useful contribution. I'm going to teach high school history back in Ohio, try to inspire young people the way teachers inspired me when I was their age. That sounds like meaningful work. It is. And it's work that doesn't require me to compete with anyone or prove myself through others' failures. I think I'm finally ready to contribute without needing to be the center of attention. As they prepared to part ways, Marcus extended his hand one final time. Admiral, it has been an honor to serve in the same Navy with you, even if I wasn't wise enough to appreciate it when we were married. The service is better because of officers like you. Sarah shook his hand warmly. Thank you, Marcus. I wish you all the best in your retirement and your teaching career. As Marcus walked away, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. The ambitious, insecure young officer who had seen her success as a threat had evolved into a man who could finally appreciate excellence without feeling diminished by it. It had taken 8 years and the end of 2 marriages, but he had learned the lesson that the Navy tried to teach all its officers. True leadership comes from lifting others up, not tearing them down. 2 years later, Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the East Room of the White House, surrounded by the highest levels of American military and civilian leadership. She was about to receive the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the highest non-combat decoration awarded by the Department of Defense, for her exceptional leadership during a complex international crisis that had brought the world to the brink of naval warfare. The President himself would present the award, recognizing Sarah's role in coordinating a multinational naval response that had prevented conflict while protecting vital shipping lanes in the South China Sea. Her tactical innovations and diplomatic skill had earned praise from allies and respect from adversaries. In the audience, Sarah could see faces from throughout her career. Admiral Richardson, now retired but still influential in defense circles, Captain Catherine Richardson Mitchell, who had become one of the Navy's most promising young commanders, Lisa Chen, now serving as a rear admiral herself, and dozens of other officers whose careers had been influenced by Sarah's example. As the President read the citation and placed the medal around her neck, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The young lieutenant commander who had been told she was too ambitious was now being honored at the highest levels of government for her service to the nation. But the moment that meant the most came after the ceremony, when a young female ensign approached her in the reception line. "Admiral Mitchell, I just wanted to thank you," the ensign said. "I'm about to report to my first ship assignment, and I wanted you to know that your example gave me the courage to pursue naval service. When I was at the academy, my boyfriend told me I was too ambitious, that I should focus on supporting his career instead of building my own. But I remembered reading about your career, and I realized I didn't have to choose between love and service if I found the right person." Sarah smiled. "And did you find the right person?" The young ensign grinned. "Yes, ma'am. Another naval officer who thinks my ambitions are exactly as big as they should be. We're both reporting to ships in the Pacific Fleet. Congratulations, Ensign. The Navy is lucky to have officers like you." As the reception continued, Sarah reflected on the true measure of her success. It wasn't the medals or the promotions or the recognition from senior leaders. It was the knowledge that her example had inspired other young women to pursue their dreams without apology, to serve with excellence regardless of who that might make uncomfortable. The woman Marcus had once called a failed officer had become a symbol of what was possible when talent was allowed to flourish without artificial constraints. Her refusal to make herself small had opened doors for countless others who now served with the confidence that excellence was not only acceptable, but expected. Later that evening, as Sarah stood on the balcony of her hotel room overlooking the Potomac River, her phone rang. It was Admiral Richardson calling from his retirement home in Annapolis. "Sarah, I watched the ceremony on television. I couldn't be prouder of what you've accomplished." "Thank you, sir. It's been an honor to serve under leaders like you." "The honor has been mine," Admiral Richardson replied. "You know, I've been thinking about something lately. Do you remember what I told you at Marcus's wedding, about officers who understand that leadership is about service, not ego?" "Yes, sir. I was right about you then, and time has proven it. You've become exactly the kind of leader the Navy needs, someone who lifts up others, who inspires excellence, who serves with humility despite extraordinary achievements." After the call ended, Sarah remained on the balcony, watching the lights of Washington reflect on the dark water of the river. Somewhere in the city below, policymakers were making decisions that would affect sailors around the world. Somewhere on the oceans, Navy ships were maintaining the watch that protected American interests and kept the sea lanes free. And somewhere, young officers were learning that excellence was not something to apologize for, that success was not a zero-sum game, and that the right partner would celebrate their achievements rather than resent them. The story that had begun with a bitter divorce and a wedding invitation meant to humiliate had evolved into something far greater, a testament to the truth that real strength comes not from diminishing others, but from refusing to be diminished yourself. And in the tradition-rich halls of the Naval Academy, in the steel corridors of warships around the world, and in the hearts of young officers who dared to dream of command, that truth continued to inspire and endure. Admiral Sarah Mitchell had proven that honor, courage, and commitment weren't just words in the Navy creed. They were principles that could transform a life, guide a career, and light the way for generations of leaders yet to come. The woman who had been told she didn't know her place had found it exactly where it belonged, at the forefront of naval leadership, breaking barriers and opening doors for those who would follow in her wake. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all, not the personal triumph over those who had doubted her, but the lasting impact on a military culture that was stronger, more inclusive, and more excellent because she had refused to accept limitations on what was possible. The invitation to witness her humiliation had instead become a catalyst for inspiration, proving that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is the opportunity to show exactly who you really are.